I did this workshop at Wellspring as well, and I decided that because I had a mead hall to work in, that doing a little bit of practicum on the end of this would be pretty awesome. So we're going to do a little bit differently than we did the first time. The workshop itself is entitled, "It's Dangerous to Go Alone, Building Relationships with Spirits and Allies," or more specifically, building relationships with reliable spirit allies. Because, there's a lot of things out there, and we'll talk about some of that. Some of you might recognize the title, "It's Dangerous to Go Alone," from a certain video game, Legend of Zelda. For those who don't, the first thing that you do in any quest is you stop at this cave, and you meet an old man who gives you a sword. He says, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this." And this happens in a variety of different ways and in a variety of different games, but anyone who has read about a hero's journey or looked at the way that myths are structured, you will often find that when people start out in this work, they receive something, and it initiates them into the work of allying with a variety of things. And what we're going to talk about is how to figure out what alliances are worth making and how to make those alliances safely as well as competently, I suppose, as we go through this. So, if you've ever attended one of Karen McLuhan's workshops, either this past Wellspring or the one before, she talks a lot about the ways that boys are initiated into the warrior path. There's a lot of parallels with that giving of a sword, giving of a talisman that happens there. But anywhere that you look, you can find this sort of thing. If you read up on the hero's journey, you will find that one of the first things that happens to any hero is that when they go out on their own, when they go out into the world, and today we're talking about going out into the spirit world, they receive some kind of talisman, some type of work that they have to do or that they have to carry with them. And so the practicum that we're going to do today is going to be a creation and blessing of those kinds of talismans. Simply put, the cosmos is a dangerous place. The world itself is a dangerous place, as we know, but the spirit world is something that is perhaps more fraught with danger than the regular world. And that is partially because we don't spend our whole time in it, so we don't really always get our footing in it. And particularly for pagans, when we talk about the world, it is not only physical, nor is it only spiritual, but it is that combination of the two. It is sacred and mundane, and the world has to include both physical and spiritual. Monotheistic religions have the luxury, I guess, of being able to ignore one or the other. They can either say, this physical world doesn't matter at all, or they can say, my spiritual life creates a safe physical world for me. We do not have that option as polytheists, because the mundane world at any time can be broken into by the spiritual world. It can appear without warning, and I suspect that everyone in this room knows that and has seen it happen from time to time. This is complicated by the fact that our deities are limited, they have their own motivations, and they are influenced by real needs and desires. There's no way to make the entire world safe for us because of these limitations, these desires, these motivations that the spirits have. There is a lot of personal responsibility that has to happen in order to make this work for us. And we have to go out and we have to build those relationships to make sure that our world is safe. Now, I'm not going to imply that the world is always fraught with danger, because it is not. But as you do more work, you will attract the attention of more spirits. And as you build relationships and alliances, there's a need to spend time learning how to navigate this world that you're encountering and to do it safely. So, much as anyone who is becoming more independent in their work, more experienced in their work, will receive kind of a greater latitude and greater responsibility, so too do we need to learn how to adapt to that responsibility, that individuality, as we begin to work more with the spiritual world. You can have friends that help you out along the way. And more specifically, you should have friends that help you along the way. And part of what we're going to talk about today, in fact, the bulk of what we're going to talk about today, is building those relationships, creating them, and maintaining them. Before I get too deep into spiritual work, I do want to mention that I have a threefold rule for spiritual work. And it's very simple and very basic, and I'll mention it again because it's important enough to mention twice. But essentially, know this: not all gods give good gifts. Not all that is dead is wise, and food beneath the mound is not for you. It's very simple, very straightforward, and it will get you out of a lot of pinches with a lot of different kinds of spirits. And it's an easy thing to teach to kids. So feel free to just grab that and start telling your kids that, because it's worth doing. Anyway, so we want to talk a little bit about finding allies. Paganism can be full of a variety of spirits, a variety of sorts. And patronage offers one model. It's probably the model that we most often talk about within ADF. The idea that you form a special kind of relationship with the spirits, and that relationship is one of patronage. Patronage is essentially where a deity gives to you more than you can ever give to them. It's not, the word itself, the word patron, is a masculine word, but it's not necessarily gendered in that way. It applies to any spirit or any relationship in which another party has more to give than the lesser party. And when we think about those kinds of things and those kinds of relationships, they are the kinds of relationships that we most often deal with in Druid. And what you're doing there is you're asking that spirit to become a major part of your life. You're asking them to be there for you when others cannot. You're asking them to provide for you on a certain level. And that process can be long and drawn out, or it can be very quick. But the thing to know about it, too, is that deities can be busy. And so when you're thinking about even patronage relationships, you might think about a hierarchy of spirits. One in which, in particular, those deities have helper spirits who have the ability to act with agency for the spirit that you're interested in working with. I work a lot with tutates, which is probably the best example of patronage I can think of. Tutates is the patron of the grove, and one of the things that we like to say is none to each in his or her own way. And one of the ways that I work with that idea that this god appears to everyone a little bit differently, and the fact that that is cool is the fact that when I look at this deity, and I see all the ways that we interact with Tutates. And Tutates just means God of the tribe. That's all it means. But I see this deity both often as a crane and as a gentle gardener. Some people have mentioned that they think that Brige is the god of our tribe. Some people have mentioned that they think that the god of our tribe is female versus male. Is a mantis, a praying mantis. That has come up most recently. If you watched our Bardic concert the other night, that was specifically mentioned. And so there's this plethora of visions of Tutates that we have. And one of the ways that I have started to think about why this is because Tutates, we know it's just a title. And so it really could be anyone. But in this case, the way that I look at it is that there's an entity out there, a deity by the name of Tutates, and he has, as part of the work that he does, a series of helper spirits. And the crane is one, and this gentle gardener is one, and Nematona is one, and a praying mantis is one. And they all act with full agency for Tutates as a spirit. So if I pray to Garnus the crane as Tutates, it is the same thing as praying to Tutates. And that, for a lot of people, that kind of explanation can help explain why all of these deities, or all of us look at this deity in a different way. And, you know, Jan may talk about Tutates in one way, I may talk about another, Mike may talk about him in another way, and it gets wonderfully confusing. There's other kinds of relationships aside from patronage that you might look at. Spirit allies, in general, are one. And these are, within neo-paganism, we have a lot of concepts about what these kinds of spirit allies might look like. They are often animals or plants or things like that. They may be spirits of place. There are a lot of different options for what a spirit ally looks like. I do generally ask that people please not call them power animals, spirit animals, totems. These are there's a lot of debate right now in the pagan community about these kinds of titles or these kinds of names for spirit allies, because they are specifically used in oppressed cultures around the world, but specifically Native American cultures use spirit animal and things like that to define a particular kind of practice. So spirit ally is, in my mind, the Indo-European analog of that anyway, and it's broader than spirit animal, and it better defines the relationship, I think, for what we look at in an Indo-European context. But when you're looking at this kind of spirit ally, which could be anyone, and these are different than patronage relationships because you don't always have this high-level spirit who's looking to provide more to you than you can to them. But very often this might be a more equal relationship. It might be something that you're more able to stand on equal footing with this ally. And there might be places where you can benefit this ally more than it can benefit you. And that is cool. These are relationships. Every time we talk about this stuff, we're talking about building relationships, and we're starting, once you get down under that patronage level, where clearly someone has more to give to you than you do to them, we start talking about relationships that look more like friendships and partnerships and things like that, things you'll see in the physical world as well. If you're looking for patronage, you mostly have to go back to feudalism to find anything that looks similar to it, I think, or even to ancient Rome to find the correct analog. But with these kinds of things, if you're looking for a spirit ally, read the mythology and find out what sort of speaks to you. Find a type of spirit that comes to you and makes some sense to you on an intellectual level, and try and connect with that spirit in that way. One of the things that I did, I connected with bees on a certain level, because when I was reading a Hittite myth, and when the Earth Mother got lost, the Hittites at one point, they lost the Earth Mother. They couldn't find her. And all the gods went out looking. They looked high and low. They went through all the fields and all the forests, and they couldn't find the Earth Mother. And finally, it was the bees who found her. They're the ones who went out, and they finally located her, and they brought her back to the gods, and gave her, and brought her back into that fold of spirits. And so that spoke deeply to me. You could connect with something that is connected with who you want to work with. The yew tree, for example, is heavily connected with ancestors. If you sit under a yew tree and think about ancestors, that sort of thing will help to pull in a spirit that is interested in working with you. You can also look at your own honored dead ancestors and look for specific ones that might help you in your path and in your life. When I started out in paganism, my grandfather was one of those individuals that I kind of reached out to, and I went looking for help from. And because I had a connection with him in my life, I was able to sort of draw on that and improve the connection in my spiritual life as well. Once when I became a senior priest, the weekend that we held Isaac Bonnewood's funeral was the same weekend that I became a senior priest in ADF. And at that point, Isaac started figuring in a whole lot more to my spiritual life than he had as the founder of ADF and as a person that I had met in person. We do some work as priests, and that work involves going to a place, you'll hear us mention it often, the Mound, where we do work with the ancient wise and with ancestors and things like that, and a variety of other spirits as well. But shortly after that elevation, when I did the Mound work, I encountered Isaac there, and we've had even more good conversations since than the conversations that I had with him in life, as several other priests have apparently as well. And as I was writing this particular workshop, my father passed, and the weirdest thing I think that happened there was that my father, the only thing he ever said to me about religion was that there are no atheists in foxholes. The only thing he ever said about religion. With the exception of when he came to my ordination, at one point I think I probably asked him what he thought, and he said, well, that was interesting. In a good way. So those two comments pretty much were the sum of our discussion of religion in my entire life. But since his death, it's been a surprising experience to have him available as well. And it is clear to me from the work that we have done that it is surprising not only for me, but also for him. So there's that. For just a moment, I want to ask as well, what other things have people done to sort of connect with a spirit, whether it's a nature spirit, a deity, an ancestor, Is there anything that anyone would like to offer up as something that they've done to connect?
Summerland Pass, Rodney did his Court of Sith, which was similar to Ian's Court of Breach, and I encountered the Spirit of Possibility, who I still work with very, very much. She's not patron by the way you're defining her as in, she does more for me. Or she is in that sense, but she's not deity either. So she's sort of something floating, and she refuses to be categorized.
Yeah.
Because that limits her, and she doesn't want that.
You'll find that with a lot of spirits. Some of them don't like categories. We're very fond of them as humans. We like to categorize our spirits. Yeah. Honestly, trying to, even in the ancient world, trying to categorize Heracles as an ancestor, a nature spirit, or a deity is complicated. He is a spirit of place where the local cultus occurs. He is an ancestor of several kings, as well as common folk, and he's clearly, at least partially, divine. So, what's that?
Apotheophany. He's dies as an ancestor and is risen to godhood.
Yeah. So, honestly, I tend to think that any spirit can transcend those categories. There's a consistent argument over whether or not we're doing it wrong with having a crane as a gatekeeper, which I'm fine with having that argument. It's fun, but I don't believe that ancestors are the only ones who can become deities, nor do I think that they are stuck in one category. I tend to think of Garnus, the crane, as an heroic nature spirit, which is why he's able to do these additional things, much as Heracles is an heroic ancestor.
I think there's also something to be said for capital C crane versus crane.
Yeah.
And like, for me, capital L lynx versus lynx.
Yeah.
So there's like that king of the group or something.
Yeah. Again, going back to the idea of those daimones or those spirits of a particular being. You might have a lynx spirit with a capital L. There is the lynx, and then there are all of the lynx spirits that do that work, or the raccoon and his trash panda army that raid all of the various spaces and trash cans.
Well, I think
Ride a wild hunt at sunset.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting too when we talk about the crane, which we have capital C crane, Garnus, but then we also have, any long-necked liminal waterbird.
Yeah.
So like, we see way more herons in Columbus than we do cranes, but it still has that same liminal transformation association.
And herons and cranes are not at all related.
Right.
Scientifically, they are not related. Taxonomically, they are not related.
It's the same way, though, in many respects with crows and ravens.
Exactly.
You see that crow, and if you're a follower of Odin rather than Morrigan, you don't think Morrigan. You're like, oh, pair of crows. That's Odin. What am I supposed to be doing?
Yeah. So there are a lot of different ways that these things can manifest in our lives.
I'm gonna have it, if I see two, I think Odin, if I see three, I think
Yeah. 2 for Odin, 3 for Morgan. I'm sure that's a children's nursery rhyme somewhere.
Not already.
I'm just saying, not it will be.
Yeah. Any other connections with spirits that anyone wants to mention? Yeah.
Crazy transfer.
Crazy transfer. Crazy transfer is a great way to do it. It's kind of related to the high magic work that Jen was mentioning with the Court of Sith and the Court of Breach.
I don't tend to look for any of the hierarchical spirits when I do that, though. I don't tend to look for the daimones of capital letter spirits. I tend to look for small spirits that are in and of themselves their own thing.
And you will find, I think that you will find that the spirits are often like that, where they are not necessarily in a hierarchy. They are not necessarily in a space where they are being looked down upon by another being, though I suspect that does happen as well. But very often what I found is the paradigm that you wish to work in that really affects how that fits. Many spirits are quite mutable and will work between different forms of magic and different styles of ritual work. And so you might have one that, when you meet it, is working as its own entity, but it's got a day job somewhere. Working as a daimone is someone else. So.
I don't know if this is too simple or whatnot, but just a nature hike. I had a run-in with a stag who had a very broken antler and started working with stag afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That's not anything hot magic. That's literally just going for a hike and having a stag follow me half a mile down the ravine, like 10 feet away.
What happened is the sacred broke through into the mundane for you,
Okay.
and the spirit world it was there all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
Is that a adequate description?
Really was. I walked over the creek, crawled under the giant log, and he was literally standing like right there, like 3 feet away from me.
That's what you get for going through a fairy door.
Really?
Oh, okay, well that makes sense.
The act of going through the eye is certainly a thing that makes sense. So, to start a relationship with a spirit, there are a lot of different ways. We've mentioned several of them, which is to go through trance work, to meet them out in the woods on accident, to work in a high-functioning system of ritual. But if you're looking to get a spirit ally or to find someone to help you in this work, because as we said, it's dangerous to go alone. You want to give them the opportunity to manifest for you and to be there for you and with you. Really what it is a process of opening dialogue. It's asking for the spirits to help or to ask who's available.
One of the things I like to do, and that I often suggest to people, if they're not looking for their first spirit ally, is to talk to the one they're already working with and say, will you introduce me to someone else? Like a lot of our grove mates in Three Cranes, because we have a Garanus working with our whole grove, or Tuntates working with our whole grove, they have that benefit by association of having a relationship with them. And so that is a good first relationship for them, and then as they build that, they can ask one of those two deities to introduce them to someone else.
Yeah. It is the letter of introduction
Yes.
process, which is, that's a valid ancient process. Our ancestors did it. You don't see a lot of letters of introduction these days, but every so often you will find someone sending an email on behalf of another person, copying them in the CC line. Even that sort of thing still happens, even though it's really rare for us. But yes, asking for a spirit to open that dialogue for you or to be the intermediary who helps. The thing that we most often recommend, make offerings, damn it. Thank you, Kurt, for the title of that particular article on the ADF site. But even if you don't know who you're offering to, especially if you have a spirit ally that you can work with, for the safety portion of this, but it is not a bad idea to make offerings and ask that the spirit who hears me hear your voice and accept the offering. You don't have to know the name of a spirit. Part of the process in the ancient world was getting the address right And if you could get the address right, it didn't matter whose name was on it, it would get to the right person. And by that I mean, you can think about it as addressing a letter. It's a to whom it may concern. When you receive a to whom it may concern, that means you, if you are the person who is concerned with this particular thing.
If not, you pass it on.
What's that?
If not, you pass it on.
Exactly. And the process of discerning whether it's for you or for somebody else isn't really entirely up to you. So if one person's junk mail is another person's awesome free offer, I mean, that junk mail has to work. They keep sending it, right? It's got to work for someone. Someone is the intended audience there. Yes, I happen to need my gutters cleaned. Who knew? And I think that, I think that there's no danger in making offerings. There's no danger in not knowing who those offerings are going to. The only real danger is in being afraid to start that relationship, because that's a relationship that you could have with somebody. That could be very beneficial. Honoring a spirit is another good way to start getting to know them. If you're really interested in Lou, for example, you should probably make offerings or do something for Lunasa. It's just a guess. If you're interested in getting to know that spirit, that's a good time to do it. If you're interested in getting to know Cernunnos, a lot of us do a lot of work with Cernunnos around Samhain. So set aside some time to honor that spirit in a way that seems appropriate. Not all spirits take notice, not all spirits want to take notice, but they won't take any notice unless you start reaching out and you start saying, hey, you're really great. I really like you.
I would also make a point that you don't have to, if you don't have a spirit ally, you might know some other person in the flesh who works with a spirit and can ask them. I've done a couple of rituals now as coming of age things for someone who shares a patron with me, and essentially writing a letter of introduction for that person as they come of age to kind of establish that relationship for them.
Yeah, and one of the first things that I do, anytime someone comes up to me and says, hey, I've got an interest in X spirit, my brain goes into Rolodex mode. I'm like, okay, who knows that one? Okay, you need to speak to this person, not really to me, because I can tell you some stuff, but this person's doing real work with them. In fact, I just did that the other day.
That
You
is also
totally-
effectively a verbal letter of introduction.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
So,
totally introduced me to Monanon 3 years ago at Wellspring, and he became a patron of mine.
yeah.
I never met him until you introduced me to him.
Well, here's the funny thing. I don't do a lot of work with Monahan. if I were going to actually intentionally introduce someone to Monahan, I'd send them to somebody else, not to me.
Well, it happened by default, I guess.
I'm glad. Sometimes introductions are accidental, as they are in the real world. Yes. Sometimes you get stood up at the bar, and the bartender happens to be your date the next night. It's great. Anyway. The other thing that is important is when you start meeting with spirits, when you start working with spirits, what you want to do is you want to set boundaries. And you can do this even if you don't know the spirit's name. It is entirely possible to say, hey, you whose name I do not know, I'm making offerings to you. I'm doing this to get to know you. That's what I want. And I want to get to know you in these kinds of parameters. And that's cool. There's the old saying that good fences make good neighbors. Good contracts make good partnerships. Be prepared to manage and enforce your boundaries even with spirits. Possibly especially with spirits. Sometimes, I have said before in this workshop, and I will say it for years and years to come, and I've been saying it for years in the past, we deal with limited beings who have their own motivations and who may or may not have our best interest in heart. Just like the people that you meet on the street. Not everyone is cut out to be a good partner in these things, and not everyone is cut out to be a good partner with you, even though they may be with somebody else.
On a flip note, if we're dealing with a being who has always been spirit, they may not understand our limitations.
Right. Those never born spirits who have never been physical, the she, the fairy folk, those kinds of things, they have completely different rule sets and completely different expectations about what a relationship looks like. It's an excellent point. And so being clear about those things and being willing to say, hey, wait, no, I think is very important. Renegotiate those boundaries often. It is okay for a spirit to push your boundaries if you are in a place where you're ready to do that. It is not okay for a spirit to run over your boundaries. And frankly, if they do that, you need to stop. And you need to tell them to stop.
Fire them.
Yes. If someone ignores your safe word, that's a problem.
Consent is always a thing.
Consent is a thing. Consent is important. Consent is vital. If you are not consenting to things, and they are doing those things, things need to stop.
And if you're even a little bit wishy-washy on that boundary, they will not stop.
Right.
Well, and you
But-
can have soft boundaries and hard boundaries. So you can have the soft boundaries of, let's see how this goes, but at any point, even in the middle of it, I might.
Yep. It's good to have those kinds of boundaries. It's good to be honest with them. And it's vital that you are willing to stand up and say, nope, I'm done. This one crossed it, we're out. So, once again, my threefold rule for spirit work. Not all gods give good gifts. Not all that is dead is wise. And food beneath the mound is not for you. You are not obliged to accept any gift. This notion that a spirit might give you a gift and you just have to learn to deal with it, I don't subscribe to that.
I have a friend who is recently become pagan, lives in the Netherlands, went to Iceland. It was just too much. He had to stop and take and do some meditation while his partner and their friend went on. And he was visited by an elf next to a burial mound. And he told the elf he just wasn't feeling very good. He just felt kind of low energy. And the elf gave him a gem. He said, what should I do with this? And the elf went like this. So he swallowed it. He didn't sleep for days afterwards. He is bipolar, and he ended up finding, of all things, a Native American shaman in Amsterdam to help him deal with it. But
Wow.
he didn't sleep for 4 or 5 days straight after this.
I mean, he said he was low energy.
Yeah, well, suddenly.
Once again, the neverborn with their differing ideas of what we need.
You
Yes.
might not want to trust someone who says, take this pill. It'll make
Yes.
you feel better.
This would have been nice to know early on before getting involved with Unmorgan and boundary, not negotiating boundaries, and it took a while before I finally started pushing back harder, and saying, no, look, really, this has to stop. But it was a learning
And
experience.
sometimes you have to assert the boundaries in extreme ways. Like you have to stand in the middle of your living room and scream curses at the gods in order to get them.
And sometimes, especially when we've been in a relationship for a long time with the spirit, redefining those boundaries is very hard. it's the same thing if something changes in your marriage, if something changes between you and your parents, renegotiating those boundaries, it's not easy. And it can be a lot of pain and emotional trouble, and I hate to tell you, that is sometimes just life. If you want to keep that relationship, if you want to make it work, you have to have open communication. You have to talk to them. You have to be willing to listen to them about what they were doing and why they were doing it, which means divination in most cases. And then you have to know how you want to reset those boundaries. The thing, particularly for folks who work with deaf gods and goddesses, their notion of gifts is not always gift-like, to say the least.
It's German gift, which means poison.
Okay. The other thing to know, I mentioned all that is dead is not wise. Death is not a wisdom level up. You don't get more wise by dying. I illustrate this with lore. When that's true. That dead person may know not to do what killed them. That might be the case. But I tend to illustrate this with the lore. When Odysseus goes to the underworld to consult a seer, Tiresias, who has died, he goes to consult Tiresias specifically because Tiresias was a seer and was able to see things and was wise and knew stuff. And so all the other spirits that come up from the underworld, he says, no, this goat is not for you, or this ram is 2 black rams. These are not for you. I don't want your wisdom, essentially. I want the wisdom of the wise dead guy, not the dumb dead guys. He wouldn't phrase it like that. But that's essentially what this looks like as we read through the Nekia. And the other thing that I will point out is that occasionally even well-meaning spirits will forget that the food of their realm is not for you. You've all read the lore, you know that those Fae party hard, and they drink hard, and they enjoy themselves. And again, the Neverborn have a different idea of what life should look like and what those boundaries should be. And so they will, the offering of food, the offering of drink, the offering of gifts is not necessarily malicious. Sometimes it's just not understanding or not remembering that you happen to be mortal and not able to eat that and return to where you need to be.
Pomegranate's bad.
Pomegranate's bad, yes. And then, and then there's spirits like my fox friend who, like a jerk, every so often I will wander by and he'll have this beautiful spread of food laid out, and he will be eating. And, we usually do these mountain journeys around 9 o'clock at night, and I'm usually kind of peckish by then. And he will attempt to tempt me with it, knowing full well that I will never accept it, and knowing full well that I shouldn't accept it. Sometimes I'll have a chicken in a bag. A wise
Just
one.
reminding you that he knows.
He does know, and
Maybe you like it fresh.
indeed, well, I
Giving
do,
you an
but
option.
but at the end of the day, I mean, the relationship that I have with this particular spirit has gotten to the kind of place where he and I can have that conversation. And it's not necessarily, it doesn't look or sound like a conversation, but we both know what's going on. We have that communication where, he is reinforcing the notion that I should not accept food by offering me food, I think, in some way.
He's also a fox.
He is a
Yes,
fox.
he's a
A
sly.
Sly, tricky little guy.
He's mocking you.
Yeah,
Rubbing it in.
yeah. And in this case, like what's that?
Testing.
Yes, testing.
Yeah.
Like so many spirits, you know, he is, I don't consider this at all malicious. It's part of our relationship.
Yeah.
Um,
Fine,
and he is helpful in general.
okay.
So, you know, every time I show up, he's not just there to tempt me. He's got information. He's interested in having a chat. He's saying, oh, here's a path you haven't tried yet. Go wander down this way. And I trust him to give
Right
me...
after he offers you the food?
Yep.
You walk down the path he's offering?
Yeah. I'm happy to most of the time, but we have a conversation.
I see your
It's-
fox on the way to the mountain occasionally myself.
Yeah.
They haven't spoken yet,
That's
like
Murphy
this box.
bit about the ice cream truck.
What's that?
It's like the Eddie Murphy bit about the ice cream truck. Where he's got the ice cream cone and he's talking to the other children.
You can't have none.
Ice cream, and you can't have none.
So, the point of that particular story is to note that, you know, just because a spirit tests you or pushes your boundaries or does things that you know you shouldn't do, doesn't necessarily mean that he's, or she, or it is terribly disinterested in your well-being, so much as they may have a different level of understanding with you. And that's okay. So, reliable allies. Understanding what a reliable ally looks. Allies come in a lot of different forms. They are occasionally transactional, so they might be very short or temporary relationships. You might have a spirit who only works with you as long as you need them to work with you. And, I mean, we encounter people like this all the time in our lives. We have those kinds of relationships. Whether that's healthy or not is another question, but for the most part, they serve us and we serve them, and that's all there is to it. And know too, though, that they can be medium term or lifetime, long-term lifetime sort of things. A number of people will know here that I have gone through at least a couple of patrons myself. I had transactional relationships that were very patronage-like before I settled on my current patron. And then I sort of settled into a very long-term relationship, which I still have with the god Asus, who's a Gaulish god. And then I had a relationship that I thought would be a lifetime-long relationship with the Greek goddess Eris. That when I became a senior priest, that relationship ended. We said, all right, it's time for us to go our separate ways. And we went our separate ways. And we're still friends. We still talk from time to time, you know, but sometimes it's just better not to be a part of one another's lives all the time. And that's cool. That happens. Doesn't mean you got to get upset about it. None of these spirits, though, are going to be perfectly reliable. These are limited spirits. They have places to go, things to do. Sometimes I think about them as the Harry Potter trading cards or the pictures in the newspaper, magical photos, where, you know, the spirit is there sometimes, and sometimes it's not, you know? It's often someone else's. And we have plenty of evidence in this. I mean, Odysseus was allowed to sail home from Troy because Poseidon was away in Ethiopia enjoying a party. What's that? Like he does. Yeah. But like friendships, even though these are not always reliable, like friendships, because none of our friends are truly reliable. No matter how strong they are, how strong those friendships are, sometimes they're just not reliable. And that's okay. We don't expect our friends to always be there. We like it when they are. We don't always expect it.
I have to say that is probably the hardest transition from Christianity to paganism that I have faced.
Yeah.
Knowing that the deities that I work with are not omnipotent.
Right.
because it is drilled into you so deeply as a Christian. And it's so hard to get out of that mentality.
Yeah. So, but like friendships, in the way that they can become trusting, even though they are not necessarily reliable. I mean, the rune poems themselves say, men will fail men. It's just something that happens. We can find that those relationships can become trusting and honest in their character over time or over a series of timelines, as case may be. And so you don't have to rely on a spirit to always be there, but the spirits will tend to be there when it matters most. And if they're not, you are always welcome to go find another spirit to cover when they can't. Having a friend does not mean you cannot have another friend.
Right. We're poly-friendly.
We are poly-friendly.
We are not fathers.
Yes.
Any luck.
That's my best friend. Can't be your best friend.
Yes. Or, as I heard today, but she won't be my best friend. Sorry. Sometimes it's a two-way street. You have to accept it. So, where can we start in these relationships? Most of us here, I'm sure, already have a relationship of some sort. If you wanted to start a new one, if you wanted to build one, because the world is not strictly divided between sacred and profane for us, the sacred pops through into the profane all the time, we can do some interesting things with physical things. I like to call these touchstones, talismans, things like that. But they are physical things that can have a spiritual significance. And probably the best example for these that I know of are priest stoles in ADF. The stoles that we wear, mine is back here, rolled up. This sort of happened on accident back in 2010 at my elevation, where Kirk forgot to put a stole on me
At the right time.
at the right time in the ritual.
There was a rainstorm in the middle.
There was a rainstorm. It was
distracting. Right.
it was awesome. It was great. We all had our wet robe contest. It was what we all wanted for so long. But but so what eventually happened is, after I had been elevated, what we were calling at the time ordained, when I became the senior priest, and I'd gone through and I had taken my oath and everything was done. We were done with that whole piece of the ritual. Kirk turned to me and said, "I forgot your damn stole."
I turned around and Lisa was standing there shivering, holding the stole. I went, crap.
And so then he had the brilliant idea to take the stole around during the working portion of the rite and have the folk tone into the stole. And exactly.
Accidents sometimes are beautiful.
And so what happened is that he made some big deal about the voice of the folk and all this stuff.
And the weight of the responsibility.
Exactly. And let me tell you, that stole became way heavier when we started doing this. Before, these were just garments. Now they're, filled with voice. It's awful. And so he charged the stole, and we've got video of doing this for Jan and Amy and David at Summerland 2 years ago.
That was one of the coolest things I've seen. That was incredible.
And what I have noticed and what others have noticed as well is I started praying to the indwelling spirit of my soul. And a few of us do this, and some of us don't, and there's no value judgment on that at all. Yeah, Kirk sings, But what I found is that as I did this, my voice began to change. It was shaped by having the stole on, and the process of praying and putting it on changed the way that I was doing the work. And in fact, if you want to see video evidence of just how much this changes, we recorded a Dublin Irish Festival where I left my stole at home because I was dealing with 2 toddlers at the time, trying to get them to the rite. And it's very different to watch that ritual and how I speak in it versus any other ritual that we have online where I've got my stole on. And apparently...
Tom asked me afterward, having no idea about any of this stole with the voice thing, and he said, "Man, Michael really sounded different today."
Yes. So, I mean, I spend a lot of time waking my stole up and putting it to sleep when it comes to the work that we do. And looking at our time now, I'm not sure we'll have time to do this, but I think we will. When we do the work, we'll have the chance to do that. But the process of doing that has really reinforced that every time I do that. And I'm building that rapport with that spirit by praying to it every time I pull it out of my bag and put it on, and praying to it and putting it away. And the really interesting thing, I think, about that particular mistake that we made in ritual that became a thing is that it did become a thing. And it's not just me, and it's not just Jen, and it's not just Kirk, but there's a number of us who pray to the indwelling spirit of our stoles. And it's become kind of that touchstone, that relationship, and we use it to build our voice. I've kind of come around to understanding it not as speaking with the voice of the folk, but having the voice of the folk temper my speech. And that's how I've looked at it. But I mean, Jan made offerings to her stole, the spirit of her stole, in her consecration rite, which was awesome.
You said call my allies.
I did say call your allies, and you did. But there's no easy distinction between a physical object and a spiritual entity, even for me, and I work with this often, and you will hear me say, I pray to my stole, which I mean, but what I really mean, but don't really mean when I say that, but do mean, is that I'm praying to the indwelling spirit of the stole. That distinction between the physical object and the spirit within it is very rough. It's hard. I couldn't tell you where the physical stole begins and the spirit ends.
They're infused with each other.
They are.
Well, and it
It's
was,
the same way with the person.
Yeah.
but I mean, especially interesting being connected to the stole itself was when we transferred yours, because for whatever reason, Michael had to get a new stole. I don't remember why.
I have owned 3 stoles in my time. Yes.
But we,
Yeah.
One was baked
One
with,
one was upside down. The sigil was upside down. Another one got destroyed in a downpour, and stained beyond usage.
You do
Yes.
not wear an unsealed belt with your stole. It's
Yep.
going to be wet.
and but anyways, we ended up taking it around to our folk at our anniversary rite at Autumn Equinox, and it ended with burning that stole in the fire, catching the spirit, and putting it into the new one, and then re-putting it on him.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So.
Write that up.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. So we've done that work before, and we have a priest coming back in at this moment. Amber is applying to come back in as an ADF priest, and I have her stole. It's been on my altar, and I honor it because that spirit needs to continue to be honored, I think, because she was working with it. I also have Seamus's stole. Because the spirits of those stoles are, they're not, you don't throw them away. They're the voice of the folk. You can't do anything else with them. It's one of the many complicating things about this work is that suddenly you have a thing, and that thing has to continue to have that relationship. Because if we're going to crumple our relationships up and throw them in the trash, we have a serious problem.
Raven,
So,
Raven was buried with his stole.
okay.
yeah.
What if somebody doesn't choose to do that? Maybe there should be something.
We have burned stoles in the past and done that work.
You're translating one to another because of damage or something.
Yeah,
We
and
also
we
burn them when people feel the need to
cleanse
cleanse or release themselves
from their oath.
from their oath.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So there are a lot of things that we do around that as well. But
So you chose the responsibility of interacting with the two souls that you inherited.
I did, yes. I offered it to those priests when they left service as ADF priests for whatever reason. I offered to them, I will hold your soul, I will maintain that relationship, I will keep it until either you come back and request it again, or we decide to do something different with it. So
Thank you for that.
it's a thing that needs to be done.
So we have deified our souls.
To an extent, yes. But the point of this is, yes, the point of this though is that you can build your own, that you can create your own talisman or touchstone or something like that to draw that spirit in, to create a connection with. And you don't have to know what that spirit is. We had no idea what this voice of the folk thing was going to turn out to be with these stoles. It happened on accident. But I want to talk a little bit about doing it intentionally, which is kind of the second part of this, which is to, I asked everyone to sort of bring a stone down here, and I have some pens around here somewhere, and there's some henna down here if anyone wants to henna their stuff instead. I think there should be enough. 11. Jan, if you will henna yours, then I have enough pens for everyone. Take a pen and pass, please. While you're doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to create that touchstone, empower it, and then I will leave it to you to use it, however you want to use it, however you want to build that relationship. So while you're passing those things around, the title of this workshop came from a comic that I found on Tumblr, really, where Link enters the cave, and he is told, as he is handed the sword, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this." And Link asks, "Will it keep me safe?" And the old man says, "No, there's no safety to be found in a sword. Sword brings death, it does not give life. It is a responsibility, a burden. It says no gift, it is a curse. I hope one day you can forgive me." And it hit me right in the childhood feels. It's great. But it's the idea that the tools that we have and the things that we receive from the spirits are not necessarily always clearly a gift, not clearly something that protects us, but often they are things that we need to learn to use in order to make our way in the world. They are responsibilities, they are things that we have to have. So did the markers make it all the way around?
No.
No, we need markers to move over here.
If anyone wants a pipette filled with henna, I only.
Yeah.
Will it soak into stone?
Yeah,
Same.
it'll stain it.
Oh.
So just know, though, that sometimes these relationships, they provide hard gifts. And sometimes you end up using them in ways that you neither choose nor expect. So what I'm going to have you guys do as our practicum is, like I said, create a talisman or a touchstone. And what I want you to do is to, on your stone, draw a symbol for the sort of spirit you want to build a relationship with. It might be, if you want to get better at divination, you might draw an eye on it for vision. A skull if you want to connect with the ancient wise or an ancestor, or deepen your wisdom. If you want to increase your fertility or creativity, it might be a sheaf of wheat or a well or something like that, or ripples coming out from a stone that's been dropped in. a heart for courage, a lime and a coconut for alchemy and healing, whatever it is that really kind of, well, you know,
Yeah.
we all have our things. And then once we've done that, we'll do a quick working to sort of empower them. So I'll give you a moment.
So, one particular attribute that you're looking for.
Yep, one thing you're looking for, a thing that you would want a spirit to help you with.
Is time something that
Yeah.
a spirit can help me with?
Yeah.
I know.
I in fact know a spirit personally that I have worked with who's really good with time. We'll talk about him later, but an hourglass would be a perfectly appropriate symbol for that, I think.
Okay.
Photemicus.
Can I do one for Norman?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, totally.
so I would have to pick for her though.
Yeah, that's all right. You're her mother, you can figure that out.
Yeah.
Do you need another stone or you got one?
I have 2 stones here.
Perfect.
I have black if somebody wants black marker.
Yeah.
I'm done with
Yeah,
purple
yeah,
as
It
well.
doesn't have to be permanent,
If
right?
anybody needs purple.
No, it doesn't have to be permanent.
Yeah.
You can always go back and make it more permanent. You don't even have to really put something on there. You can simply charge this with intent. That's fine too. But the creation, the process of putting something on the sigil is, or sigil on there is good. Ah, okay, I do see what it is. I've been there. Oh, in time. 15 minutes. We can do a ritual in 15 minutes, no problem. I don't want it to be complicated. I just want it to work. So what you're actually going to see, I've got 2 of my allied spirits here, my sickle and my soul. And when we do this, it never has to be terribly complicated, I don't think. It just has to speak to you in some way. So when I pray to my soul, usually it's very simple. It is something like, Soul, the priest of the people of ADF, for the voices you give to me today, for the work that we do, call out to you and I say that I thank you. Similarly to my sickle. Sickle of the priest of the people of ADF, I call out to you today. Help me cut away those things that need to be pulled apart, and draw together those things that need to be pulled together. Cargo pockets are a wonderful thing.
So you find it enough to acknowledge and thank the spirit as effectively an offering to it of your remembrance.
Yes. Yes, I do. The point is to, and I do more complicated things as well, but in this case, because what we're doing is essentially reaching out and touching that thing, I will occasionally describe opening the gates not as a giant cosmological process, but instead as tugging at the sleeves of the gods and saying, hey, we're here.
Hello.
Yeah, we just want your attention. And I think that's all you really need to do sometimes with these things. You can certainly get more elaborate.
But no, I like to hear that because horrible time management, but I often find that most of what I do for my devotionals or offerings is taking a small space of time out of my day to remember, and honor, my animal spirit.
Well, it's
or animal
the
health.
same way with like a significant other. You don't bring them a gift every time
Yeah.
you're interacting with them.
I've often felt a little guilty that I'm not more physical gifts from other things, but it's
Well, maybe
nice seeing
maybe
that
their
it's-
love language is acts of service.
And praise is the gift.
Praise is a gift. And speaking of, tonight we will not be making physical offerings to the fire. We will merely be speaking in praise and using our voices. So this is as simple as an ADF rite can possibly come. I'll need a couple of volunteers. We'll just kind of go around. Anyone who wants to do a particular part. My basic outline is we're going to call the Earth Mother, Inspiration, the Gatekeeper, and open the gates. We'll just open the fire, I think, for this. That's all we really need. And then we will call to the kindreds in general. So I'm not going to break them out. And then we will, let's see, does anyone have an oven set? Can we take an oven?
I have
We've got a fire.
I have Ohm if someone is good at reading Ohm. I am not.
Perfect. Okay, we have an oven set. We can, would you like to fire scrap?
I can fire scratch.
All right,
Say
so
we
Jan's
have a
gonna
fire.
fire. We'll do that instead of doing a last minute oven.
Do you
pull
have
with
offerings of
strings.
any sort?
I have potato chips.
That'll work.
Okay, we're gonna offer potato chips. This will be awesome.
Potato chips.
Kirk's over there shaking his head.
They're really good potato chips.
They're
really good?
delicious.
Okay.
As long as they're good, we're good.
You should taste one first.
Yeah, we don't eat that.
At the end of the day, I mean, we're
You know what?
giving to the spirits what we have.
I mean, I don't think any of you want to see me offer milk, so,
I have frankincense.
because that is what I typically do.
Yeah.
I also
It-
have bread.
It will be past our offering portion anyway. We will no longer be technically offering. This is an offering for the vision, right?
Yeah.
In which case,
Or
the
dark.
oil on potato chips is gonna be great for that. So,
Greasy potato chips.
yes.
They're
All right.
They're not super greasy, I promise.
Well, a little bit of grease will be nice.
So,
'cause
yeah,
it'll
grease
be
would be
big.
good, is what I'm saying.
All right, so I'm gonna ask folks to, does everyone have a sign on their rock?
Not yet, I'm still trying to figure out for hers.
It's okay.
Pick the dark rock.
Well, I will let you continue to seek
I
as we do
used
this.
yellow on a dark rock and I can see it. I had to go over it a couple times, but I can see where it is.
All right, so what we're gonna do is we're going to start off honoring the earth. Who'd like to honor the earth?
I will.
O goddess of the warm, moist earth, O holy Mother Earth, unfold your arms that in your warm embrace we'll know your endless love. Earth Mother, we show you honor.
Earth. Show you
Show
honor.
you
Who would like to call for inspiration? Anybody?
Listen, one.
Inspiration, we welcome.
Inspiration.
Inspiration. Who would like to call to a keeper of gates? That I can do. As the mists arise and arrive, as they pull in about us, as they become a cloak, a barrier surrounds this mead hall. We call through those mists to the keeper of gates, the warder of ways, the watcher. We call to you, hear our voice. As we tug at the sleeves of the kindreds, as we center ourselves in this cosmos, know that we honor you as we create this fire as the center of all. Gatekeeper, call to you and we ask that you let this fire that is kindled upon the land, born in the waters, and with a pillar of smoke that supports the heavens, open as a gate. Let the gates be open.
Let the gates be opened.
Who would like to call to the kindreds in general?
I shall. As we stand and sit in this mead hall, I call out to those beings who have been honored here before, the ancestors of those gathered here, who have heard these words and been drawn to our presence, to those spirits of nature and the land, who have looked with curious eyes and heard with ears that have perked, and come forward to hear our words. And to those gods and goddesses of those gathered here and those who have gathered in the past, we call to you and ask that you join us at our sacred fire. Kindreds all, we honor you.
Kindreds all, we honor you. Children of Earth, breathe deep in this sacred space. Know that the spirits have been called and honored. And call out with me. Spirits all, accept our offerings.
Spirits all, accept our offerings.
Now, Seer, take us a moment.
Any specific question?
I want to know where this work will lead us. How about that?
I see a flame that spins and branches out. The interconnectedness of the work drawing in and releasing into a million branches, pulling the power together to send it out again into the world.
You good?
Good now.
Okay. Then let us do our working. So I'm going to ask everyone to do is to come up here, if you are able, around the fire.
With our
Not
rock?
too close.
With your rock, yes. Yes. Don't get so close you get too hot, but. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to think on the symbol and the intent that we have. We're going to ask for those spirits that may hear our voice and our words, who may be open to the idea of a relationship, to come out of the shadows and out of the mists, to be here with us. As we do this, as we think on these things, remember the omen, the drawing together, the connectedness, spreading out into the millions of different paths. And we're going to tone with these stones. So Jan, if you will please lead, I will follow. Breathe deep. Hold the stone in your hand. Know that it is at the center, warmed by the fire, filled with the omen, brightening you. When you take it home, place it upon your altar, carry it in your pocket, however it is that you need to interact with it most often. Do that with the stone. Put it in a pouch. Put it in a wrap of some sort and onto a necklace. Carry it in some way or offer to it daily. But do that work so that the spirit that uses it as a touchstone, that is drawn to it, knows that you want to build a relationship, knows that you want something more to come of this work that we have done today. And let that work be bright and warm.
Bless you.
So be it.
So
Be it.
Have a seat, and we will thank those that we have called. It is quite fun.
Sorry.
Kindreds of those gathered here now and before and in times to come, for your presence, kindreds, we thank you.
Kindreds,
we thank you.
To the gatekeeper, you who have brought us to the center, you who have given us this good fire that has had the pillar of smoke that supports the heavens, that was born of the waters, that was kindled upon the land, and is now flaming embers. Gatekeeper for your work, gatekeeper, we thank you.
Gatekeeper, we thank you.
Inspiration.
Amen. You that flow from the heavens and into us, that our words may be beautiful, and that our thoughts may be creative. We thank you for being here with us this day. Inspiration, we thank you.
Inspiration,
we thank you.
And O Earth Mother, we praise you, we honor you, we worship you, and we love you. May you uphold us in our lives as you have upheld us in this rite. Earth Mother, we thank you.
Earth Mother, we thank you.
To all the spirits whose attention we have grasped, to all the voices that surround us in the night, to all the voices that reside in our hearts, who wish to be there. We thank you, and this rite is ended.
Woo! Woohoo!
So carry those forth, let them be bright for you. We're just slightly over time, so I will let folk go. Back up top, because I think I heard them ring a dinner bell about 3 minutes ago. You think so?
Look, I didn't hear it all.
Maybe. I know time is complicated, but we'll figure it out. All time is sacred. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.